He really threw a winner my way. One of Harrison Ford's biggest hits only happened because Kevin Costner couldn't do it. Kevin Costner must really like Harrison Ford, as he essentially gifted the actor one of his biggest hits with Air Force One. Costner and Ford were two of Hollywood's biggest stars during the 1990s, and between them fronted an almost embarrassing number of box office hits. Costner had JFK, Dances with Wolves, and The Bodyguard, while Ford had his Jack Ryan movies and The Fugitive. Given the similarities between the pair, it's a surprise they've never worked together, though Costner was this 1997 Wolfgang Peterson movie can be accurately summed up as Die Hard on Air Force One, where Ford's president, James Marshall, has to deal with a terrorist takeover of the titular plane. Air Force One became one of Harrison Ford's biggest box office hits outside of franchises like Indiana Jones or Star Wars, grossing over $315 million worldwide via Box Office Mojo. It's one of his most fondly remembered, too, thanks to a great supporting cast, including Gary Oldman as the villain, and great one-liners like "Get off my plane." Prior to Ford getting cast in Air Force One, he was coming off the back of two duds: the 1995 remake of Sabrina and the troubled IRA drama The Devil's Own. Ford was in need of a hit, but despite the two men not knowing each other very well, Costner handed the screenplay to Air Force One to him. Costner was originally set to play Marshall, but when scheduling forced him out, he insisted Ford was the only one who could replace him. Says Ford via Los Angeles Times. In hindsight, it would have been the wiser move for Costner to take Air Force One himself. Instead, he starred in and directed the post-apocalyptic drama The Postman. The movie bombing, alongside the perceived failure of his 1995 blockbuster Waterworld, saw Costner's leading man status fall into decline. Still, Costner was clearly more passionate about The Postman, and Ford ultimately felt like the better fit for Air Force One's lead. During his heyday, Ford had a talent for spotting scripts that would be both commercially appealing and give him great characters to play. This was true of Witness, The Fugitive, and Air Force One, which is one of the star's most purely entertaining films from the 1990s. It's more of a claustrophobic thriller than a slam-bang action movie, though its set pieces are also nail-biting when they arrive. Air Force One is also a prime example of the types of original, high-concept projects that used to get greenlit in Hollywood before franchises and IP largely took over the business. Air Force One is aided immensely by Peterson's suspenseful direction, who was no stranger to movies set in tight spaces after Das Boot, and he lets his actors cook. Ford also excelled at playing action leads who didn't feel invincible. He can kick ass when needed, but it's the circumstances that force Marshall into saving the day. Ford is also backed by a very game cast, including Glenn Close as his vice president, William H. Macy, and Jurgen Prochnow. The closest Ford has come to working with Kevin Costner is by fronting 1923, a prequel to Yellowstone. Costner hardly ever returned for sequels to his own movies, which made his 5-season run on Yellowstone his biggest franchise by default. The Taylor Sheridan-created series went from strength to strength each season, and has been spun off into other shows like 1883. Given that Ford is playing a descendant of Costner's John Dutton, who is long dead by the time the latter was born, they don't get to share any scenes. Still, 1923 allowed Ford to front the kind of lavish, old-school Western that rarely get produced now. Sheridan has a large checkbook when it comes to his Yellowstone saga, so it's hardly surprising he can lure the likes of Ford or Helen Mirren to the project. Intriguingly, Air Force One might become a belated franchise for Ford too. There were reports in 2024 that Air Force Two was being developed, with Ford set to play a role in the project. If a sequel does come together, maybe Ford should make sure Costner gets a role as a thank you for handing Air Force One to him on a plate. It appears Ford doesn't have any current movies in the pipeline following Captain America: Brave New World, which cast him as another POTUS. Ford is set to return for the upcoming third season of Shrinking, however. And enough to hand the script for Air Force One to Ford. In the swirling, star-studded galaxy of Hollywood, sometimes fate doesn't just whisper, it shouts. And for Harrison Ford, one of his biggest cinematic triumphs came not from meticulous planning or years of grooming the perfect role, but rather from a simple, unexpected twist. Kevin Costner couldn't do it. Let's rewind to the early 90s. Kevin Costner was riding high, riding really high. Dances with Wolves had made him the king of the cinematic prairie, and audiences couldn't get enough of his blend of brooding charm and reluctant heroism. At the same time, Ford, already a box office titan thanks to Star Wars and Indiana Jones, was navigating the more mature phase of his career, looking for roles that married grit with gravity. Enter Jack Ryan. The CIA analyst-turned-action hero from Tom Clancy's techno-thrillers had already been brought to life once in 1990's The Hunt for Red October, with Alec Baldwin stepping into Ryan's polished loafers. But when it came time to adapt Patriot Games, Baldwin bowed out amid rumored scheduling conflicts and backstage negotiations. The studio went scrambling. Kevin Costner, fresh off his Oscar wins, was eyed to take over the reins. And he was interested, deeply interested. The part was tailor-made for someone like Costner, intelligent, principled, and able to project both vulnerability and command. Paramount wanted him. Audiences would have cheered him. But he couldn't commit. There was a passion project brewing in his heart: Waterworld, the post-apocalyptic ocean epic that he couldn't shake from his creative soul. So with great hesitation, Costner turned down Patriot Games. "I had to follow my gut," Costner later said in an interview. "But I knew it was a strong script. I remember thinking, whoever gets this, they're going to score." And score he did. Harrison Ford, ever the dependable powerhouse, swooped in. It was a smooth pivot for Ford, who hadn't played a spy before, but brought a weathered warmth to Ryan. He wasn't flashy or overly stylized. He was a husband, a father, a man who simply found himself in impossible situations, and who did the right thing anyway. That was the genius of Ford's casting. He made Jack Ryan feel real. Patriot Games smashed the box office in 1992, earning over $170 million globally and sealing Ford's place as the definitive Jack Ryan for a generation. He followed it up with Clear and Present Danger in 1994, another commercial and critical hit. Together, these two films cemented a different kind of action star: brainy, loyal, and driven by moral outrage rather than ego. Years later, in an interview for an anniversary retrospective of the film, Ford laughed when asked how he came into the role. "Kevin couldn't do it. He really threw a winner my way," he said, tipping an invisible hat toward Costner with that signature Ford smirk. Sometimes this business is about timing. Sometimes it's about who's unavailable. And sometimes it's just plain luck. Costner, to his credit, never expressed regret. Waterworld, while infamous for its bloated budget and production woes, eventually earned cult status and recouped its costs in global markets. But the shadow of what could have been, the Costner-led Jack Ryan universe, remains one of Hollywood's great what-ifs.